The great hall of the orbital spire glittered like a cave made of ice and stars. Light bounced off crystal walls and floors so clean they showed the ceiling twice. The air smelled of strange things, like metal after rain, sweet flowers, and a sharp, clean smell like medicine. It was the day of the Festival of Gifts. Important people from many star nations were there. There were tall beings with thin bodies and skin like polished silver. There were short, wide beings with skin like rough stone. There were others with feathers, or with many careful eyes. They all wore fine clothes, rich with color or shining with soft light. They talked in quiet voices that came from small devices on their chests, turning their words into common galactic speech. In one corner, Sumi Kim smoothed her dark blue formal suit for the 10th time. She was young with a sharp, smart face. Her job was to speak for Earth. Her hands felt cold. She looked at the being next to her, and her stomach tightened with worry. The being next to her was a human man named Jinwoo Park. He did not look like the others. He was a big man, round in the middle, with a kind face and hair that was more gray than black. He looked calm. He looked happy. This was the problem, because Jinwoo Park was dressed as Santa Claus. His suit was a bright, cheerful red, with white fluffy trim at the wrists and neck. A wide black belt circled his large belly. His pants were red, and his boots were black. On his head was a red hat with a white ball at the end. He carried a simple old dark green duffel bag, which looked very plain in this shiny place. "Remember," Sumi whispered to him, her voice tight, "you are a cultural emissary, a master artisan. You represent the human spirit of giving. The suit is a symbol. Don't just smile." Jinwoo's eyes crinkled at the corners. "It is a good suit, Sumi. It is comfortable, and it is true to the symbol. A man named Nicholas gave in secret. That is the spirit." Sumi closed her eyes for a second. She loved her people. She loved Earth. But sometimes she wondered why they had sent a toy maker, and why he had insisted on the full costume. They began to walk forward into the main hall. The music, a soft hum of alien strings, seemed to stutter for a moment. Hundreds of eyes of all shapes and colors turned to look at them. First, they looked at Sumi. Her formal wear was acceptable. Simple but acceptable. Then their eyes moved to Jinwoo. A ripple went through the crowd. It was not the sound of words at first. It was the sound of bodies moving. It was the click of claws, the rustle of feathers, the hum of surprise. Then the translators on the aliens' robes, or around their necks, began to whisper the words they were saying to each other. From a tall, silvery being with no nose, its translator box said softly, "Biological thermal insulation layer seems excessive. Is the human vessel malfunctioning?" A group of short, stout beings with 4 arms looked at Jinwoo's belly. Their translator, with a rough voice, chuckled, "Efficient mass storage. Perhaps for long space journeys without food." One feathered being tilted its head, its translator piping, "The color is a warning signal in many species. Is this a threat display?" Sumi's ears burned. She kept her face still, a diplomat's face. She walked straight toward the main platform. There, the most important guest sat, Prince Clarn of the Velian Empire. The Velians were very advanced, very powerful, and very serious. The prince was young, but he sat perfectly still on a floating chair. He had large, dark eyes and skin like pale moonlight. He wore simple, elegant gray robes. Next to him stood his guardian, Ambassador Vtail, who was even taller and more severe. They reached the base of the platform. Sumi bowed her head. Jinwoo did the same, his hat almost tipping off. He straightened it with a smile. "Ambassador Vtail." "Prince Clarn," Sumi said, her voice clear. "On behalf of Earth, I present our cultural emissary, Master Artisan Jinwoo Park." Ambassador Vtail looked down at them. His eyes, silver and without pupils, moved over Sumi and then settled on Jinwoo. He stared at the red suit, the white fluff, the big black boots. His thin mouth did not move. "We welcome the human delegation," Vtail said. His voice was flat, like a computer speaking. "Your representative's covering is unique. Explain its function." Sumi spoke quickly. It is a ceremonial uniform, ambassador. It represents an ancient figure from our culture known as Santa Claus. He is a symbol of unconditional giving, of joy. The suit is part of that story. Tale processed this. A narrative garment. I see. And the biological form of your artisan? Is it optimized for this role of giving? Jinwoo answered before Sumi could. His voice was warm and deep, like stones in the sun. The suit fits the spirit, sir. And the spirit, in my people, sometimes has a warm laugh and a full belly. It is how we show we have enough to share. A new sound came from the crowd. It was a series of quick, light clicks. It was alien laughter. The translators didn't even bother to translate it. The meaning was clear. They were laughing at the fat human in the silly red suit. Prince Klarn watched from his floating chair. His big eyes looked at Jinwoo's face, then at his red-covered belly, then back to his face. No expression, just quiet, cool watching. Tail gave a small, slow nod. It was a dismissal. Your explanation is noted. The Festival of Gifts will begin. You may take your place with the other delegations. Sumi bowed again, pulling Jinwoo gently by the arm. They moved to stand with the other groups. As they walked, Jinwoo's boots made a soft, squeaky sound on the crystal floor. More translator whispers followed them. Believes the story is a valid reason for such a display? Primitive carbon unit pageantry? The gift itself will likely be a consumable nutrient paste in a festive container. Sumi's jaw was so tight it hurt. Jinwoo just adjusted the duffel bag on his shoulder. He looked around the beautiful, cold, glittering hall. He saw the proud aliens and the bored young prince. He did not look upset by the laughter. He looked thoughtful, as if he was seeing something underneath all the shiny surfaces that no one else could see. He patted his belly where the black belt sat and waited for his turn. The hum of the crowd settled into a quiet, expectant silence. A tall, insect-like being with a smooth blue shell stepped onto the main platform. This was the master of ceremonies. Its voice, translated by the many devices in the room, was clear and without emotion. The Festival of Gifts begins. May each offering weave a stronger thread in the fabric of the consortium.
Sumi Kim stood rigidly beside Vimyo.
She watched as the first delegate, a massive creature from a heavy-gravity world, moved forward. The skin was like plates of stone. It held a small, dark box in its thick hands. When it placed the box on the offering table before Prince Klarn, the box unfolded itself. It became a complex model of a swirling galaxy, made of what looked like captured starlight and tiny, moving points of light. A low sound of approval moved through the hall. Prince Klarn looked at it. He gave a small, precise nod. His guardian, Tail, standing beside the floating chair, spoke for him. The prince thanks the Thulk nation for this map of the newly born nebula. It is aesthetically sufficient. This was how it went. One by one, the grand aliens presented their gifts. Each gift was a wonder of technology or rare art. The bird-like Sereni brought a small crystal. When activated, it filled the air above the prince with a silent, beautiful explosion of colors. The exact light pattern of their home star's death, transformed into art. The prince nodded. Tail said, "The prince acknowledges the artistic data." A species of graceful, water-filled beings offered a living sculpture, a plant from their world that reacted to thought. If you looked at it with calm, it bloomed a soft blue. The prince looked at it. It remained a closed bud. He nodded. Tail said, "The prince recognizes the biological innovation." Sumi listened to the formal words. She watched the prince's face. He was not rude. He was perfectly polite. But his large, dark eyes were empty. They looked at the fantastic gifts, the lights, the models, the living art, as if they were seeing a report on screen. There was no joy,
No surprise.
not even interest. He was a boy sitting through a very long, very boring lesson. She glanced at Jinwoo. The old man was watching too, but he was not looking at the gifts. He was looking at the prince. His eyes were soft. He watched the prince's hands, which were folded in his lap. Then Jinwoo's gaze sharpened. He saw something that as the prince nodded at a gift of singing metallic stones. His right hand moved. The long, thin fingers of his left hand lay still. But the fingers of his right hand, hidden in the folds of his gray robe, were moving. They were rubbing against the soft fabric. Back and forth, back and forth. A small, repetitive, nervous movement. Then the fingers pinched a bit of the robe and twisted it. Tightly.it was a tiny sign. A sign of a child who had been sitting too still for too long. No one else seemed to see it. Tail's silver eyes were on the gifts. The other aliens were looking at their own presents, proud of what they had brought. Only the human in the big red suit noticed the fidgeting fingers. The parade of gifts went on. A gift of perfume that contained the smell of an alien ocean. A gift of a tool that could shape any rock like soft clay. Each was more impressive than the last. Each was met with the same polite, cold nod from the prince. The twisting of the fabric in his hidden fingers grew a little tighter. Sumi felt a sinking feeling in her own stomach. What was their gift? Toy. A simple thing made of wood and paint. In this room of light and magic, it would be a joke. The snickers from their arrival would become full, open laughter. Earth would be remembered as the planet of primitive fools. She leaned close to Jinwoo. Her whisper was desperate. Master Park. Perhaps there is another item in your bag? Something more technologically relevant? A hologram? A light crystal? Anything? Jinwoo looked at her. His kind eyes held no worry. The gift is for the prince, Sumi. Not for the room. But look at him, she hissed, careful to keep her face forward. He is a scientist's child. He lives with machines and data. He will not understand a toy. Jinwoo's eyes went back to the prince. He watched the boy's hidden, twisting fingers. I think he understands stillness too well, Jinwoo said quietly. Sometimes, a thing must move to be alive. Sumi did not understand. She felt only cold dread. Finally, the master of ceremonies spoke again. The delegation from Earth of the Sol system will now present its gift. A new wave of quiet whispers went through the hall. All eyes turned to the human in the red suit. The air felt different now. It was not the respectful silence for the other gifts. It was the quiet before laughter. Sumi took a deep breath. She walked forward, Jinwoo beside her, his boots making their soft, squeaky sounds. They stopped before the prince's platform. The prince looked down at them, his face a pale, calm mask. Tail watched, his expression unreadable. Sumi gave her short, prepared speech. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was beating fast. Prince Klarn, Ambassador. Earth offers a gift from the hands and heart. It represents our belief that wonder is a universal language, and that joy is the simplest technology. She nodded to Jinwoo. This was his moment. Jinwoo Park smiled a warm, gentle smile. He bent down, a little clumsily because of his large belly, and placed his old green duffel bag on the floor. He opened it. Every alien in the room leaned forward just a little. What would come out? A weapon? An energy source? Some strange earth artifact? Jinwoo's hand went into the bag, came out holding a simple wooden top. The silence in the great hall became complete. It was a heavy, thick silence. The only sound was the soft, ever-present hum of the spire's systems. Every eye was fixed on the object in Jinwoo Park's hand. It was a simple shape, wider at the top and pointed at the bottom. It was made of a warm, light brown wood. Hand-painted rings of bright blue and sunny yellow circled its body. At the very top was a small, dull metal spike. It was small enough to fit neatly in Jinwoo's palm. The aliens stared. Their translators, for once, did not whisper. The object did not compute. It was not glowing. It was not changing shape. It gave off no energy readings. It was a solid, static, primitive thing. Jinwoo did not seem to notice the silence. He looked at the top with the fondness of a creator. Then, he looked up at Prince Klarn on his platform. The prince's large, dark eyes were fixed on the wooden object. His head was tilted just a little. It was the first real change in his expression all day. With a calm movement, Jinwoo bent his knees and placed the top on the smooth, crystal floor. He positioned the pointed end down. He wrapped the short, white string that was attached to the top around it a few times with practiced fingers. He took hold of the small, plain stick at the other end of the string. Then, with a quick, sharp pull, he yanked the string. The top sprang to life. It dropped to the point and began to spin. It was a fast, steady, humming spin. The blue and yellow rings blurred into a soft, swirling circle. The metal tip ground against the crystal floor with a pleasant, quiet, whirring sound. It moved in a small, wandering circle, its path perfectly balanced. Whir. The sound was soft, but in the silent hall it was all anyone could hear. The top danced. It was alive with simple, physical motion. It was not a hologram. It was not a projection. It was a real thing, spinning because a human had made it spin. The silence broke. A snort came from the Thulk delegation, the rocky-skinned beings. Their translator crackled to life with a gruff voice. A kinetic rotational toy? For the prince? Is this a joke? A ripple of similar sounds followed. The bird-like Serini chirped to each other, their own translators offering confused snippets. Purpose? Unclear. Educational value? Minimal. Craftsmanship? Basic. The tall, silvery Velians around Ambassador Vtail did not speak. They simply stared, their smooth faces impossible to read. But Vtail himself took a single step forward. He looked from the spinning top to Jinwoo, then to Sumi. His silver eyes were cold. Sumi felt her face grow hot. She wanted to disappear into the glittering floor. This was worse than she had imagined. They weren't just laughing. They were confused and insulted. She glanced at Jinwoo. He was still kneeling on one knee, watching the top spin with a gentle smile, as if it were the most wonderful thing in the room. Prince Clarn leaned forward in his floating chair. His eyes were wide, following the wandering path of the top. His mouth was slightly open. For a moment, he looked like any child watching a fascinating movement. Then, Ambassador Vtail spoke. His voice cut through the low noise of the crowd, flat and final. The Velian Collective thanks the human representative for this demonstration of basic mechanics. He said the word basic as if it were a dirty word. The prince, however, has evolved beyond such tactile distractions. His education is in quantum states and governance, not in primitive momentum. The words hung in the air, a public dismissal. The top, as if hearing them, began to wobble. His perfect spin faltered. The whirring sound grew uneven. It tilted, swayed, and finally fell over on its side with a quiet tick against the floor. It lay still, just a painted piece of wood again. The sight of the fallen top seemed to confirm Vtail's statement. A few more alien laughs, now less nervous and more sure, echoed softly. Jinwoo slowly reached out and picked up the top. He held it carefully in his hand, brushing a bit of invisible dust from its painted surface. He looked up, not at Vtail, but directly at Prince Clarn. The prince had settled back into his chair, his face smoothing back into its calm mask. But his eyes were still on Jinwoo's hand, on the now still toy. Jinwoo gave the prince a small, knowing nod. It wasn't a nod of apology or shame. It was the nod of one person who has shared a small secret with another. Then he stood up, his knees cracking a little. He placed the top back into his duffel bag. He bowed his head to the prince and to Vtail. He did not say a word. Sumi quickly stepped forward, giving a stiff bow of her own. "We thank you for your consideration," she said, her voice tight. She turned and quickly led Jinwoo away from the platform, back through the crowd. The whispers followed them again, louder now. Clearly a failed cultural translation. Perhaps their concept of gift is merely object. The human's cognitive functions may be simpler than scans indicated. Sumi walked fast, her back straight, ignoring it all. Jinwoo walked beside her, his pace steady and unhurried. He placed a calming hand on her arm for a second as they reached their place at the edge of the hall. "Breathe, Sumi," he said softly. "The first gift is always just to see if they are watching." Sumi turned to him, her eyes blazing with frustration and embarrassment. "Watching? They were laughing, Master Park. They think we are fools. That top wasn't a gift. It was an insult to them. Jinwoo looked back toward the platform, where the next delegate was presenting a floating orb of liquid light. Prince Klarn was already back to giving his sterile, polite nods. No, Jinwoo said, his voice low and certain. The gift was the spin, and he saw it. He watched it until the very end. That is all that matters. He patted his duffel bag, where the top now lay silent. The first move is made. The walk back to the human quarters was long and quiet. The corridors of the orbital spire were just as beautiful as the Great Hall, but they felt cold and empty now. Sumi Kim walked quickly, her shoes making sharp clicks on the smooth floor. Jinwoo Park moved more slowly beside her, his soft boots making no sound at all. He carried his duffel bag over his shoulder. The door to their assigned room slid open with a whisper. Inside, it was a plain space with white walls and simple furniture. A large window showed the darkness of space and a curve of a blue planet below. As soon as the door closed, Sumi let out a long, frustrated breath. She turned to face Jinwoo. All the professional calm she had held onto in the hall was gone. "A top," she said. Her voice was flat, tired. "You spun a wooden top in front of the entire Galactic Consortium." Jinwoo placed his bag gently on a table. He began to unbutton his red coat. "Yes," he said simply. "They laughed at us. They are still laughing. Probably on every communication channel right now." Sumi ran a hand through her hair. "I told the committee. I said we needed something impressive. A microsculpture of Earth. A data crystal with all our music. Something that shows we understand technology. Something that shows we are not primitive." Jinwoo hung his red coat neatly over a chair. Underneath, he wore a simple, comfortable gray shirt. He sat down, the chair sighing under his weight. He looked at Sumi, not with anger, but with patience. "Sumi, what did you see when you looked at the prince?" "I saw the heir to the most advanced empire in this part of the galaxy. I saw someone who has everything. Starships, computers, power." "Did you see a boy?" Jinwoo asked. Sumi paused. She thought of the prince on his floating chair, his still face, his empty eyes. He is not just a boy. He is a symbol, political entity. His childhood is different. It is about learning to rule. And did he look like he was enjoying learning to rule today? Jinwoo's question was gentle. Sumi did not answer. She walked to the window and looked out at the stars. "It does not matter. Our job was to make a good impression, to show humanity belongs here. We failed. That top, it made us look simple. It made us look like we do not understand this place." Jinwoo was quiet for a moment. He reached into his duffel bag and took out the wooden top. He held it in his hands, turning it over, looking at the bright paint. "This," he said, "is not simple. To make a top that spins true, that sings a good song as it moves. This takes understanding. You must know the wood, its grain, its weight. You must know balance. Not the balance of equations, but the balance you feel in your hands. You must know about friction, about force. You must know about joy." "Joy?" Sumi turned from the window, her arms crossed. "What does joy have to do with politics? With technology?" "Everything," Jinwoo said. He placed the top on the table and gave it a little flick with his fingers. It spun in a small, wobbly circle before falling over. "You see? Without the right force, without the right touch, it falls. Person is the same. Even a prince. Especially a prince." He leaned forward, his kind face serious. "Those other gifts, Sumi, they were for the Empire, for the Velian collective. They were about power or beauty or science. They were not for him. Not for the lonely boy in the chair. Did you see his hands?" Sumi shook her head, confused. He was twisting his robe, a small, nervous movement. He has been taught to sit still, to be perfect. But inside, something is moving. Something wants to spin. My gift was an invitation. A question. "Do you remember how to play?" "And he rejected it," Sumi said, pointing back toward the hall. His guardian said it was a tactile distraction. The guardian rejected it. Jinwoo corrected softly. The prince, he watched. Until the very end, he watched the spin. Before Sumi could reply, a soft chime sounded in the room. A light on the wall glowed blue. It was a message. Sumi walked over and touched the panel. A calm, computerized voice filled the room, the voice of the spire. A private summons has been issued for the human cultural delegate, Jinwoo Park. He is to present himself at the Velian Royal Suite. Immediately, the delegate's handler is not required. The message ended. The light faded. Sumi stared at the wall. Her anger and frustration vanished, replaced by a spike of cold fear. A private summons? After that, this is not good. They are going to complain. They might even eject us from the festival. Or worse. Jinwoo stood up. He did not look afraid. He looked thoughtful. He walked to the chair and picked up his red coat. "What are you doing?" Sumi asked, alarmed. "They summoned the cultural delegate," Jinwoo said, putting the coat back on. "This is the uniform. I should wear it. But it's a private audience. Maybe you should be more formal, more serious." Jinwoo buttoned the coat over his belly. He smoothed down the white fluffy trim. "The suit is honest. Says what I am. A giver. A bringer of small joys." He walked to the table and picked up his duffel bag. He slung it over his shoulder. "You're taking the bag? Master Park, please. Just be careful. Be very diplomatic. Apologize if you have to." Jinwoo stopped at the door. He gave Sumi the same gentle, crinkly-eyed smile he had given in the hall. "Do not worry. The first gift was to see if he was watching. The second gift, that is for him alone." The door slid open for him. He gave a small wave and walked out into the corridor, the red of his suit a bright spot against the cool white walls. He was going to meet the prince alone. Sumi was left standing in the quiet room, her heart pounding, not knowing if her friend was walking into disaster or something else entirely. The door to the Velian Royal Suite was different from the others in the spire. It was a dark, smooth metal, without a handle or a visible seam. It seemed more like a wall than a door. Jinwoo Park stood before it, his red suit bright under the hallway lights. He waited. He did not fidget. He simply held his duffel bag and breathed calmly. With a soft hiss, a vertical line appeared in the center of the dark metal. The line widened as the two halves of the door slid apart, disappearing into the walls. The room inside was not like the Great Hall. It was dim and quiet. The walls were a soft gray. There were no glittering crystals here. In the center of the room stood Prince Klarn. He was not on his floating chair. He was standing on the floor, looking smaller without it. He still wore his simple gray robes. His large, dark eyes watched Jinwoo carefully. Behind the prince, Jinwoo could see a large, clear screen. It was a one-way mirror. He knew Ambassador Vtail was likely standing on the other side of it, watching and listening. This was not a completely private meeting. It was a test. Jinwoo stepped inside. The door slid shut behind him with a final sound. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The prince looked at the red suit, the white fluffy trim, the kind face. Jinwoo looked at the boy, seeing the tension in his thin shoulders. "You observed something," the prince said finally. His voice was high, but it was not a child's voice. It was careful and clear, like a small, clean bell. "In the hall. My guardians did not observe it. The other delegates did not observe it." "What was your analysis?" The question was direct. It was a demand for data. Jinwoo understood. The prince was speaking the only language he had been truly taught, the language of observation and report. Jinwoo set his duffel bag down slowly on the floor. He did not bow. He did not use any titles. He spoke as one might speak to a clever, tired child. "My analysis, young prince, was that you are very good at your duties," Jinwoo said. His voice was warm in the cool room. "And very alone." The prince's eyes widened just a fraction. His mouth tightened. Behind the screen, unseen, Ambassador Vtail would be stiffening. "That is an emotional assessment, not an analytical one." the prince stated, repeating words he had probably heard many times. It is inefficient. It is not based on measurable data. Is it not? Jinwoo asked softly. He nodded toward the prince's hands, which were clasped formally in front of him. The measurable data was in your right hand. During the ceremony, the repetitive motion against the fabric of your robe, the micro-twists, the data indicated restlessness, or boredom, or a need for tactile stimulation that your environment does not provide. Jinwoo used the clinical words on purpose. That is what I observed. Prince Clarn looked down at his own hands, as if they had betrayed him. He unclasped them and let them fall to his sides. He said nothing. Your guardians see a prince. Jinwoo continued, his tone gentle. They see a mind to be filled with knowledge. They see a symbol. They give you gifts for that prince. Gifts of science and art for the future ruler. They are not wrong. He paused. But I saw a boy in a chair who had to sit still for a very long time. A boy who has everything in the universe, except maybe one thing. The prince's eyes lifted from his hands. They met Jinwoo's. What thing? Permission, Jinwoo said. The word hung in the quiet air. It was not a galactic concept. It was a human one. Jinwoo bent down. He opened his duffel bag. This time he did not pull out the top. His hands moved inside the bag, and he pulled out something larger, wrapped in a soft blue cloth. My first gift was to see if you were curious, Jinwoo explained, unwrapping the cloth. If you cared about the spin. You did. You watched it fall. He laid the object bare on the cloth on the floor. It was a marionette. A puppet made of fine, polished with the color of deep space, with tiny silver threads for its joints. It was dressed in perfect, miniature robes of gray and silver, a tiny copy of Velian formal wear. But the most stunning detail was the face. It was not a human face. It was carved and painted to look exactly like a young Velian. It had the large, dark eyes, the high cheeks, the slight frame of Prince Clarn himself. The prince took a sharp, quiet breath. He stared at the small version of himself made of wood and string. Jinwoo picked up the control bar from which the silver strings descended. He offered it to the prince. This, Jinwoo said, his voice barely above a whisper, is the gift. You lead a world with your mind. It is a heavy thing, but sometimes the heart needs to practice leading something too. Something light, something that can dance or stumble or bow without any consequence, even if it is just a pretend friend. He held the control bar out, waiting. Prince Clarn looked from the puppet to the strings to Jinwoo's kind face. Slowly, as if moving through thick liquid, he stepped forward. His long, thin fingers reached out. They trembled, just a little. They closed around the smooth wood of the control bar. He lifted it. The marionette lifted off the cloth, dangling from its strings. The prince stared at it, hanging there, so still. Now, Jinwoo murmured, sitting back on his heels. See what he can do. The prince's fingers twitched. The puppet's left leg jerked. Then its right arm. The movements were clumsy, awkward. The puppet spun in a lopsided circle. But the prince was not looking at the ceremony now. He was not thinking of politics. His whole attention was on the strings, on the small figure he was trying to command. He made the puppet take a step. Then another. He made it raise an arm. A slow, wobbly bow. Jinwoo watched. Then, without a word, he reached into his duffel bag one last time. He pulled out two simple wooden tops, just like the first, but one painted green and one painted red. He set them on the floor. With two quick pulls of their strings, he set them both spinning. Whir, whir. The two tops danced and hummed on the gray floor, circling each other. The prince looked from his struggling puppet to the spinning tops. His eyes went wide. Something in his careful, controlled face broke open. It was not a smile, not exactly. It was a look of pure, unfiltered wonder. And then, from his mouth came a sound. A soft, hiccuping chirp. It was a small, broken noise, like a bird learning to sing. It was a sound no translator was meant to handle. It was the sound of a Velian child's laugh, behind the one-way screen, Ambassador Tail stood frozen, his silver eyes wide, all his protocols for diplomacy and analysis utterly silent. He was not watching a prince. He was seeing a boy he had forgotten existed, and the boy was playing. The sound was over in a second. The prince's hand flew to his own mouth, as if to catch the escaped chirp and push it back inside. His eyes darted toward the large, dark screen on the wall. He knew he was being watched. The wonder on his face was quickly replaced by something else. Shock and then fear. He had broken a rule. He had made an inefficient sound. The two tops spun on, their cheerful hum the only noise in the room. Jinwoo Park did not react to the prince's fear. He did not look at the screen. He simply watched the tops, as if their spinning was the most important thing in the universe. "The green one is winning," Jinwoo said, his voice calm and conversational. The prince lowered his hand from his mouth. He looked at the tops. The green one did have a tighter, more centered spin. The red one was starting to wobble. "Why?" the prince asked, his voice small again, but curious. "The wood inside is a little denser near the point," Jinwoo explained. "The weight is better balanced. You cannot see it. You can only know it by watching it work." The prince looked from the tops to the marionette he still held. The puppet dangled, forgotten in his other hand. "And this? How is it balanced?" "Ah," Jinwoo said. He shifted to sit cross-legged on the floor, ignoring the way his red suit pulled tight. "That is a different kind of balance. Not in the wood, but in the strings. And in the hand that holds them. You must feel the weight through the threads. It is a conversation. The puppet tells your fingers what it needs." Slowly, the prince looked back at the marionette. The fear in his eyes softened, replaced by a flicker of that same wonder. He moved the control bar slightly. The puppet's head tilted. "He is listening," the prince whispered. He wasn't talking to Jinwoo. He was talking to the puppet. "All good friends listen," Jinwoo said softly. The prince moved the bar again, more deliberately this time. He made the puppet walk toward the spinning tops. The steps were still clumsy, but they were more confident. The puppet's little wooden foot tapped the floor near the green top. The top jumped, skittered, but kept spinning. Another soft chirp escaped the prince, this one quicker, lighter. He did not try to stop it this time. He spent a long time like that. He made the puppet walk around the tops. He made it bow to the red one as it finally fell over. He experimented, making its arms swing. Once, he got the strings tangled, and the puppet collapsed in a heap. The prince made a frustrated click, but it was a child's frustration, not a prince's anger. Carefully, with intense focus, he worked to untangle the silver threads. Jinwoo did not help. He just sat and watched. He was a still, red mountain in the quiet room. His presence was not demanding. It was permission. Finally, the prince lowered the puppet to the floor, letting it sit. He looked at Jinwoo. The mask was gone. His face was alive with 1,000 questions. "You made this? For me?" "I made it for the boy who was twisting his robe," Jinwoo said. "Yes. But you did not know you would see me. You did not know about my hand." Jinwoo smiled. "I did not know it would be you. But I have met many princes and princesses in my life. The ones who sit on platforms. They are often the same. They have many things, but they do not have this." He pointed to the puppet, then to the tops. "They do not have a thing that is only for fun. A thing with no purpose except to make a happy sound in your chest." The prince looked down at his own chest, as if searching for the echo of that chirp. "Such things are not logical. They are not for learning." "What did you learn just now?" Jinwoo asked. The prince thought. "I learned how to untangle strings. I learned that dense wood spins longer. I learned that my fingers can tell a story without words." He paused. "That is learning." "It is," Jinwoo agreed. "Sometimes the most important learning does not come from a screen. It comes from the hands and the heart." The prince was silent for a long time. He looked at the old human in the red suit. "Your gift. It was not the toy, was it?" Jinwoo's eyes crinkled. He shook his head. "No, young prince. The wooden things are just keys. The gift is the room, the quiet, the time, the permission to use the key. From the corner of the room, a new sound came, a soft, clear tone. It was the signal from the other side of the screen. The prince's face closed down a little. The weight of his title was returning. He straightened his shoulders. But he did not let go of the marionette's control bar. He held it tightly, the strings wound around his thin fingers. "They will tell me to send you away now," the prince said, his voice formal again, but not cold. "That is okay," Jinwoo said. He began to slowly get to his feet, his joints protesting. "My job is done." "What is your job?" the prince asked. "To see the child," Jinwoo said simply. He bent and picked up his duffel bag. He left the two tops spinning and wobbling on the floor. He left the puppet in the prince's care. He walked to the door, which hissed open before him. He turned and gave one last, small bow. Not a bow to a prince. A bow from one person to another. The prince, still holding his puppet, did something then that was not in any protocol. He nodded back. It was not the sterile nod from the hall. It was a real nod. A nod of thanks. The door slid shut, leaving the prince alone in the dim room with his spinning tops, his marionette, and the fading hum of a new kind of silence. On the other side of the screen, Ambassador Tail remained utterly still, watching the boy who was now kneeling on the floor, not to receive a gift, but to play with one. The morning after the Festival of Gifts, the great hall of the orbital spire was quiet. Most of the alien delegates were preparing to leave. The air was filled with the low hum of packing and the soft goodbyes in a dozen different languages. Sumi Kim stood by the main viewing window, her bag at her feet. She looked tired. She had not slept well, worrying about the private summons and its consequences. Jinwoo had returned late, saying only that the meeting was good, and had gone straight to bed, snoring softly in his red long underwear. She expected an official reprimand. Fine, perhaps. At worst, a notice that Earth's application for full membership in the consortium was being re-evaluated. She braced herself for cold looks as the other delegates passed by. But the looks were not cold. They were different. The tall, silvery Velian aides who moved through the hall did not look at her with disdain. They looked at her with a new, careful curiosity. The bird-like Sereni who walked past gave her a slow, respectful blink of its large eyes, a gesture she had learned meant acknowledged. Even the rocky Thulk ambassador, when its path crossed hers, gave a low grunt and a slight dip of its heavy head. A sign of respect among its kind. Sumi was confused. Where was the laughter, the whispered jokes? Then, the main doors to the hall opened. Everyone stopped and turned. Prince Clarn entered. He was not on his floating ceremonial chair. He walked. His steps were measured and quiet. He wore his simple gray robes, but in his right hand, held lightly by its control bar, was the Velian marionette. The small wooden figure walked beside him, its steps a clumsy but perfect mirror of his own, its silver strings glittering in the light. Behind him, a step back and to the side, was Ambassador Tail. The ambassador's face was its usual calm mask, but his silver eyes watched the prince and the puppet with an expression Sumi could not name. It was not disapproval. It was something like awareness. A deep silence settled over the hall. All eyes were on the prince and the tiny wooden version of himself taking careful steps across the crystal floor. Prince Clarn walked directly toward the human delegation. Sumi's breath caught in her throat. She stood up straight, her diplomatic training snapping into place despite her shock. The prince stopped before them. He looked first at Jinwoo Park. Jinwoo was once again in his full Santa Claus suit, his duffel bag over his shoulder, looking kind and warm and utterly out of place. And yet, in that moment, he looked like he belonged more than anyone. The prince did not bow. He did not give a sterile nod. He lifted the control bar in his hand, making the marionette look up at Jinwoo. In a clear, young voice, the prince spoke. "The gift is appreciated. It is being studied." Jinwoo smiled. He bent down, not to the prince, but to the puppet's level. "I am glad to hear it," he said to the little wooden figure. Then he looked up at the prince. "Remember, Even friends made of would need rest sometimes. A flicker of understanding passed between them. The prince gave a small, almost invisible smile. It was just a tiny lift at the corner of his mouth, but on his usually still face, it was like a sunrise. Then the prince turned to Sumi. He inclined his head.
Delegate kim o?
Your world's understanding of nuanced diplomacy is noted. It has been an educational festival. Sumi was so surprised she could barely speak. She managed a deep, respectful bow. Thank you, Prince Clarn. The honor was ours. The prince nodded again. He turned, the marionette turning with him, and began to walk back across the hall, heading for his departure gate. The crowd of aliens parted for him, their eyes wide. They were not looking at the prince with pity or amusement now. They were looking at the puppet. They were looking at the human in the red suit who had given it. The message was clear to every diplomat in the room. The Velian prince had not rejected the human's gift. He had embraced it, publicly. This changed everything. As the prince left the hall, the quiet broke into a soft wave of conversation. The tone was different. Sumi heard new words in the translated whispers. A profound psychological insight leveraged cultural simplicity into a deep connection. The human calculated correctly where our complex technologies failed. Sumi turned to Jin Woo, her mind reeling. They think you're a genius, a tactical mastermind. Jin Woo watched the prince go, his eyes soft. What I am is a toy maker, Sumi. I saw a child who needed a toy. That is all. But the puppet, how did you make it look like him? You had never seen him before. Jin Woo adjusted his hat. I studied the Velian people, their bone structure, their posture. I made a puppet of a Velian child. I hoped it would be close enough. Every child should see themselves in a toy. Sumi looked at the old man's kind face. She thought of the snickers, the laughter, the cold dismissal. She thought of the prince walking with his puppet, a small act of quiet revolution. She finally understood. The gift was not the wood or the paint or the strings. The gift was the vision to see a lonely prince as a boy, the courage to give him a simple thing in a room full of wonders, the strength to bear the laughter to deliver that gift. Jin Woo picked up his bag.
Come, Sumi.
Our ship is waiting. I have many orders to fill. I think many children on many worlds might need a friend who listens. They walked out of the great hall together. No one snickered now. The human in the red suit walked with a new kind of silence following him. A silence of respect and of wonder at the strange, simple power of a gift given from the heart.